everyone. Welcome back to Mars on Life. I'm Ryan Mancini, joined with me as always.
Sebastian Shug. This time just the two of us. I'm not hearing any ambient noise, so.
Yeah. If you had tuned in last week, we had three guests on the show: Sean Thomas, Crystal Dwan, and Mike Beck. Obviously, that episode is available pretty much anywhere podcasts are found, so please tune in. They all got to witness a bunch of the protests that were going on across Southern California over the last couple weeks, and all three of them were happy enough to join us and kind of give their piece on what they saw and kind of how we move forward. And obviously, this is something that we still can't avoid it. It's something that, and I don't mean that in a way that this has been a negative. In fact, I've looked at the last 2 weeks with probably the most positivity I've had all year. And that's only because this is kind of what I've wanted people to do in moments of outrage, quite like this, is I want to see people in the streets. I want to see people tell their leaders they're not happy. And I think that that's something that I genuinely hope carries on into November, because if we think we're going to get things accomplished with the guy we got now, think again.
I keep forgetting that we're in an election year. Like, I just realized that about like 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, that really went by fast.
Yeah. Well, and that's just it. It was really coronavirus that ended the campaign, or at least the Democratic primary.
Yeah. Because where I am in Colorado Springs at the moment, which is a deeply rooted conservative area. I mean, the Air Force is right here. Right.
And that's an increasingly blue state, too.
Well, you kind of go from the outskirts of Denver and you sort of see where people come from in terms of their redness. You can go from a Ralph's to a CVS to a dispensary, and, there's still open carry laws. Right. The thing is, when you live in somewhere like Colorado Springs or whatnot, you have to go all the way up to Manitou or somewhere close, which is considerably more blue to really indulge. But you want to talk about coronavirus here, that's basically non-existent. Or at least people think it isn't, because when you go into Target, people aren't even wearing their masks. Yeah. So, thankfully there's, no symptoms, no anything on my end. Family I'm staying with right now, nothing. It's, to tell you the truth, I think Colorado is over its second wave, or so I've heard. But that's great. What's not great is myself having to go back to California, but cross that bridge when you come to it.
Well, that's just it. Right now we're going through our whole phase 3 of reopening, and everybody's so anxious to finally go back out and do this, that, and the third. And the frustrating thing is that there are an increase in cases. Now, obviously, there's a lot of those cases where it just has to do with the fact that a lot of people are getting tested, but at the same time, there's places across the country where they're seeing like a 40% increase in COVID cases. And, the sad thing is that these protests, that's just it. It kind of goes back to something.
You can just say it point blank. These protests are not aiding in the decrease of coronavirus cases, and rightfully so. I mean, there's large crowds gathering. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah. Well, it's also
it's the lesser of two evils here, where everyone's so anxious to support a cause that they are, obviously putting their own lives at risk medically.
Especially if they're not social distancing, because that's...
Well, of course they're not. I mean, you go on Instagram and it's just a cluster of, activism, which, again, is great. But, again, it comes at a cost. I wouldn't be surprised if the next surge in California is directly parallel to what's going on. Because Colorado, you don't see much of it, right? In fact, I haven't seen I've seen maybe 2 people off the side of the road of an independent record store with a Black Lives Matter sign. And that's it.
Yeah.
So you could definitely say that it's varying from state to state.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's, and obviously this is the analogy that will never die, but that's just it. The anxiousness of everybody wanting to reopen, something that I've been talking with my parents about and talking with friends about is that it's almost as though there's people out there who, they didn't participate in the protests, but they also didn't actively, or at least they didn't take every warning about coronavirus seriously enough. So, the people that they still go out on walks without a mask in their neighborhoods, or they're walking on the sidewalk and somebody's walking in their direction and they don't move out of the way, nor do they keep their distance. And it's like they go home and they see these protests, and it basically becomes confirmation bias, where they see the protesters and they think, oh, well, if all these people are out protesting, then that must mean coronavirus really wasn't such a big deal after all. And then they go out not wearing a mask, and they run the risk of exposing everybody or themselves. And it's kind of just like, because that's just it. That's been my
You've
one
said that
apprehension.
4 times, Mancini. I'm keeping count. I really am. And I'm like,
my apprehension, I guess, is just that, I'm me. I've been to protests. I went to a lot of the protests here near where I live. A lot of them were beautiful. They were outstanding. The number of people that were out walking on the streets, I have never seen it before in my life, at least in this area. And we even had one hilarious incident, I think it was last week, where allegedly there was going to be close to 1,000 people coming into Santa Clarita. And basically our city council freaked out over what a bunch of right-wing scaredy cats thought, where they were asking, do we need to board up our stores, and do we need to show up to the counter protests armed? And there was even one Facebook group that they were asking these questions, and on top of that, they were being told by their fellow gun-toting concerned citizens to leave all of their MAGA swag at home, because they basically were like, oh, well, it's going to incite the snowflake liberals. And it's like, why on earth would you take a gun with you to a peaceful protest that is predominantly like people below the age of 20? Mm-hmm. Because that was a lot of what I saw. There was a ton of young people walking through the streets, holding up signs, chanting, singing, sharing, carrying water bottles to people. And it's just like, to see some of the hate thrown at these young people, it all goes back to the David Bowie line of these children that you spit on as they try to change their worlds. They're immune to your consultation. They're quite aware of what they're going through. And that's exactly what I saw. And the idea that anybody would be so frazzled as to think, do I need a gun because some 13-year-olds with some pieces of, paper are going to hurt me? I mean, it's sad, but that's what happens when you live in an area that was born out of white flight back in the day. So
definitely.
But on top of that, with the protest has come a lot of beautiful artwork, and it's something that, obviously, since you and I have been in quarantine, we haven't really been able to really, I guess, flesh out the show in regards to talking about art around Southern California, art at museums, art at festivals, street corners, exhibitions, whatever location you can find artwork for the public to see. And right now we're kind of getting an influx of that. And I guess, I don't know if you wanted to kind of touch on what's in this Smithsonian Magazine article.
Yeah. So This article from the Smithsonian Magazine, entitled "How Artists Are Responding to the Killing of George Floyd," as I'll personally answer beautifully, but as the article continues, essentially murals and portraits are memorializing the 46-year-old black man and calling for societal change have appeared across the world. If your Instagram flood isn't already, flooded with, images such as these, this article will definitely bring you back up to speed on how important it is. So, throughout modern history, art and protests have gone often hand in hand, from the incarceration of Japanese Americans, World War II, Vietnam War, and Civil Rights Movement, and the AIDS crisis. Examples of American artists' creative responses to tragedy and injustice abound. So it basically goes into detail about how Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd. And as Smithsonian Secretary Lonnie Bunch said in a statement earlier this week, once again we bear witness to our country's troubled history of racial violence, from Freddie Gray and Eric Gardner to Sandra Bland and Trayvon Martin. And once again we are trying to cope as best we can, whether suffering in silence, participating in protests, or engaging in conversations that evoke all of our emotions. And once again we try to explain to our children that which cannot be explained. Once again we pray for justice and we pray for peace. Once again. Beautiful mural.
Yeah.
Definitely some liberties taken there, but
well, you know where that
to analyze
I think it says in
this,
the caption where that mural is.
Yeah, I Can Breathe Now, which is, I think, it's very poetic.
Yeah, no, it's poignant. It's also, that's just it. When I saw that mural, and when I saw, because I had seen the mural, they've used the mural in the news constantly because that's where he was killed.
Mm-hmm.
But when you see where it says "I can breathe now" at the bottom, like that's the part that, at least for me, that, and I know somebody hearing this could say, "Oh, that sounds sappy," but there's genuinely something about that "I can breathe now" that's haunting, and it's kind of heartbreaking.
The Houston mural, where it depicts a halo and wings for George Floyd, where it says "Forever breathing in our hearts." I thought that was a very nice touch. But, when you scroll down to Dallas, where I believe it's an airplane, or it might just be a flag.
Yeah,
but an airplane
with banners.
Airplane with banners saying "My neck hurts."
Yeah.
If that isn't poignant, then nothing is.
And this is and that's just it. The opening paragraph kind of said what I'm about to say, which is, this is something that has a long history in the United States of the outpouring of inspired artwork after any kind of moment of tragedy. Obviously the AIDS quilt, it's the thing that stands out the most, because that was supposed to be a message not only to the world, but especially to our leaders at the time in Washington, D.C., who basically did not do enough to save so many lives of people who died from AIDS in the 80s and into the 90s. And, I'm currently reading Set the Night on Fire, L.A. in the 60s by Mike Davis and John Wiener. And, there's a whole chapter about the artistic and cultural renaissance after the Watts Rebellion. And in a lot of ways, that's, it's hard to say it's hard to say because it's too soon.
Right.
But in a weird way, like, that's kind of the real kind of forerunner to what we're seeing now, especially with a lot of the artwork acknowledging George Floyd's murder. I mean, I saw there was one artwork in here from Chicago. I know that our good friend Shawnee Badger actually changed her profile photo. I believe it was on Twitter. She changed it to where it's it's George Floyd. He has his eyes closed and he's got flowers and leaves on his head. And it says "Justice for George." It's because that's just it. If you think about it, and in a lot of ways this kind of ties in with our other topic, where and obviously this is a subject we've kind of talked about before. We're in this kind of artistic fugue state where, you know, it's kind of like it's hard because there's people that think, oh, well, you know, how do we create entertainment or how do we create music? And so what people do is that they basically brag either about their bedroom, because that's where they're having their bloody Zoom call with some network, or I can't remember the artist's name, and it's killing me that I don't recall. But there was some musical artist who basically bragged about making a whole album while in quarantine, and you know, it's sad, and it's also, you know, before we ever even made this show, like, this was something I would talk with you about, that the arts, you know, the arts as what we all basically get commercially, it's stagnant, and at times it's not creative, and at times it's not engaging or stimulating. Whereas you see all this artwork commemorating George Floyd, and this is the kind of stuff that it really shows how bright and powerful people in our country really are. And people that, you know, that's just it. There's a lot of this artwork that, yeah, they're credited, but it's not like as though art museums or, you know, some kind of revolving art gallery is going to call out these people and say, you know, hey, kid, I like the cut of your jib. You want to work for us? Like, it's not going to happen. So it's beautiful, but, you know, it just breaks my heart because it bothers me that it had to be an incident like this for us to really tap into our artistic potential.
I don't mean to throw a wrench in kind of our discussion right now. If anyone kind of knows me as the personality on Mars on Life, it's the very satirical, I would say, other side opinionated. Well, not other side, because I don't identify as being right wing in particular. But I wanted to ask you as like a personal question, because I've seen the documents, I've seen the past arrest records, and just sort of the allegations that people are pinning on George Floyd as being not the best individual when he was alive. I wanted to ask what your opinion was on that.
Well, I've heard none of it.
Yeah. So when it comes down to it, and I'm saying this as someone who doesn't even know it to be truthful, I'm just saying because it's out there online, and whether people want to take a look at it. And this is in no way taking the importance away of these protests. But when you look up, you know, George Floyd, you get an insider's look about who he was as a person. Now, I'm not sure if this is just another, here I go putting on my tinfoil hat here, but I'm not sure if this is another one of 4chan's doings. Like they did with the black squares. That is a fact. Unfortunately, it did.
I had heard that was from like a white music label.
No, they organized it. They also organized Cut for Black Lives Matter, just a bunch of heinous things.
That I didn't hear about. Wow,
yeah.
Well, it is 4chan. I mean,
yeah, but
You'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
But I'll go into a quote-unquote George Floyd's criminal past. Again, not even sure if any of this is true. I'm sure this is just here to spin a yarn. You know, George Floyd moved to Minneapolis in 2014 after being released from prison in Houston, Texas, following an arrest for aggravated robbery, arrested for passing a counterfeit $20 bill, under the influence of fentanyl, methamphetamine, decade-old criminal history, ringleader of a violent home invasion. It just goes on and on and on. So I could link you the website, I guess live, just to kind of get your opinion on it, because I feel like this is what a lot of people, especially right-wingers, very, very far right-wingers, try to do is, you know, they try to spin this narrative as if it was, you know, well, the death really wasn't that big in the first place, completely missing the point entirely.
Right.
And, it just kind of makes me wonder why people really feel the need. And, again, this show is not to just discuss one side of the issue. It's also to discuss, what's wrong with people, at least like what causes them to tick in terms of why they think certain behaviors are okay. So, I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on it.
Well, that's just it. Looking at the website, and especially looking at this one pathetic tweet where they're clearly sharing some of the same conspiracy theories that Donald Trump has been saying about Antifa. That's just it. Is that because I remember, this is the really sad part too. Is I remember everything that went down with Trayvon Martin as though it were yesterday. The trial, the testimony, you name it. And because at that time I was still trying to understand the political sphere. I was still trying to understand what, I was at a young enough age where I was kind of transitioning from history into politics and understanding where those lines blur. And I remember at that time there was so much confusion, at least to me, at one point, simply because of how the media kept spinning what happened to Trayvon Martin. And,
right.
And
cracking jokes at the thing. I don't know if you saw the horrendous jokes that they made about it at his expense.
I might have. I don't know. It was 8 years ago. But every time something like this happens, you're going to have a bunch of right-wing lunatics decide, actually, if you really look him up, you'll find out he was actually a real criminal. And it's kind of just... It's opportune and it's inappropriate.
Yeah, because do you want to look at this past as defining the entire narrative of who he was when he was alive versus who he is now as a dead man? Or do you want to save political face by assuming this role, or assuming this perspective of, now crime has gone down because look at who he really was, kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, it is very inappropriate and incredibly, like you said, opportune, just in such a heinous way.
Well, because on top of that, you mentioned the article had mentioned something about what was in his system when he died, when he was killed. There's been 2 autopsies, and both of those autopsies do differ around some of those circumstances regarding what was in his system. Basically, the independent one said he had nothing in his system when he died. And the official autopsy basically said he had X, Y, and Z, including fentanyl, in his system. Now, between the two, that it's kind of hard for me to side with one versus the other. I mean, granted,
because it's like,
there I go again saying granted again.
Well, but how are you going to politically spin something that's medical? Or more importantly, why would you even? Because if something was found in his system, this one other comment says that he actually tested positive for COVID. What benefit?
That I have heard absolutely nothing about.
Yeah, no, I'm actually just finding that out now. Again, could be another Alex Jonesian attempt.
Well, I'll put it this way: like everything that I've heard about him from, and obviously, it's from friends, it's from family, is that, the guy was a sweetheart, he was a mentor.
Yeah.
I know that he was buddies, and I'm kicking myself for forgetting this guy's name, but I know there was a basketball player, like a professional basketball player that he was buds with, who came out and talked about what happened to George. But I think that's what's kind of interesting too, is that you don't have any of the politicizing coming from Trump, which to me is the biggest surprise, simply because this was the same man who wanted the state of New York to execute the Central Park Five for a crime none of them committed, and yet all 5 of them were in jail. One of them, who, by the way, none of them were adults. One of them was put basically in an adult prison while the rest were in juvenile hall until they reached adulthood. and all of them pretty much had their lives ruined. And here's this big orange, fool of a human being, Donald Trump, basically say, oh, the state, he took a whole one-page ad in the New York Times with his big Sharpie signature at the bottom and basically advocated for the state of New York to use capital punishment and execute all of them just simply because they were there. And they, in his mind, he thought they deserved it. And it's just, I'm surprised he hasn't done that in this regard, because he easily could. He, this is what he thinks. This is what he believes. And the fact that he hasn't, it's surprising, but it shouldn't surprise anybody because, again, he's also an opportunist. So it's unfortunate. And, I think I'm happy. I feel safe to say that there are a lot of people that are, eulogizing George Floyd as a terrific human being. And, I never knew the guy. I never met him. But, what happened to him, it fills me with rage to see that video. It breaks my heart to see that video. And the fact that something so primal, the murder of a human being, could lead to something as beautiful as all these protests saying, we are tired of the systemic racism. We are tired with bigotry all across the board from our government, our law enforcement, journalism. So this is something that's also been brought up very often, is racism within the newsroom. This is something that I know I brought it up last week with Sean, and without naming names, I know somebody who was fired for being black covering a Black Lives Matter event. And I resigned from that newsroom in protest because that's a total betrayal of the ethics of journalism. It's not a conflict of interest. It can't be. And on top of that, you can't totally turn a blind eye to what's going on in front of you. You need every person you can get. And if you have a skilled reporter, their identity should never, ever matter. Because if they're a damn good reporter, you send them out and you have them go cover it. And the fact that this happened to somebody that I know, that's another thing that bothers me to no end. Because as Hyman Roth says in The Godfather Part 2, this is the business we've chosen. And if I sounded a little bit like John Lovitz, that's because he says that a lot in City Slickers 2, The Legend of Curly's Gold. But great movie. Great comedy. Great sequel, too. But it's encouraging to see a lot of people come out with their stories and what happened to them. And then on top of that, to have all of this artwork. My real question, though, is this going to follow the footsteps of, say, the AIDS quilt or, other totems and pedestals to past grievances that, we claim we're beyond this. We claim we're better than this. And then it happens again. Mm-hmm. We have the Watts Rebellion. Yeah. We have the Watts Renaissance. We have the blowouts in the 60s. But then, try and do the math in my head, less than 3 decades later, you have Rodney King. And that's kind of the weird irony of the time period we live in. We're about 30 years. In 2 years' time, that will have been about 30 years since the LA riots.
Yeah.
So I'll put it to you this way: this is. I won't go so far as to say this has become cyclical, but it could.
Part of me wants. Not part of me, but I would think part of me speaking in regards to like the greater society would rather have this ignorant, nihilistic approach of, it's still going to happen.
Right.
And I'll admit, when I used to think that way about Trayvon Martin, and especially now George Floyd, and everyone in between. By the way, buy my book, read their names, free on Amazon. There you go. Shameless plug.
Well, and it's material for people marching too.
Right, and I would go through the list, well, I was going through the list when I was editing it and publishing it, and I was just like, this has happened over and over and over. Are people going to understand? And I'll admit, a part of me felt like people think it's just a lot easier by just saying, yeah, it's not it, and this will continue. And it's sickening to think. And it's sickening to think that we've been doing this for the past 100 some odd years. But, I don't know. Something keeps coming.
Hold on, doing what the last 100 some odd years?
Hating people for being a different skin tone, among others.
Dude, that's been going.
Yeah,
that's been going on
since the start of time. Yeah, that's been going on since the start of time. So,
And in regards to North America, we just hit the 400, or actually, if we're talking the Western Hemisphere, we just hit the 400-year mark last year.
Yeah. So it's like when people ask, where do we go from here? When someone says, I don't know whether or not they're just pleading ignorance or they are just genuinely concerned that they don't have an answer on how to fight systemic racial oppression, because it's been going on for however long, and there doesn't seem to be any answer in sight. Black people still are killed by white people, and I hate to sound so blunt when I use these terms here, but what is there to do? I think a lot of people have some great ideas. This artwork is one of them. But is it stopping everything?
Well, I guess if there needs to be like a short answer question to, because I think that's something that you and I, we're always on the lookout for artwork that's going to stand the test of time.
Yeah.
And it's gonna really now, and it's gonna reflect society. Obviously, that's kind of the point of the show. Now, obviously, this artwork does that, but ultimately, does it? It goes to your point of, is this going to do anything that's going to lead to systemic change? Ultimately, and this is just what I've been seeing, not just from, the local news or, Trump complaining or even just going on social media, but it starts from the ground up. And that's why, for example, the Minneapolis Police Department disbanded. Great. Start from scratch. You don't want to be back in the same position you were in. And I think the audacity of cities like New York and Los Angeles both responding to claims of either, take money out of the LAPD budget or defund the police, which has become like the new kind of buzzword catchphrase of the last few weeks. You can make a lot of progress by doing that. The problem, though, is you got to fight off not just politicians, but the police unions. John Oliver had a whole bit about police unions and how powerful they are, which, is kind of sad because I'm pro-union, but at the same time, police unions, unlike regular unions, are just so damn powerful, and they hold so much clout and credibility that it's scary because, these are the kind of people that will literally tell you, the taxpayer, the person they're trying to protect, if you take money away from me, I won't protect you. Or if you, like they get vindictive and they start channeling Daryl Gates back in the early 90s where they're basically threatening the LA City Council. And it's pathetic because it's just pettiness up the wazoo. And you're just thinking to yourself, now, wait a minute. You've been presented with the facts of being part of a policing system within the United States that has its founding in catching either escaped slaves or freed slaves. If I had that history in my genealogy, I would acknowledge it, but I would be as far away from it as I possibly can. And as I say that, several minutes ago, I got a notification from Associated Press saying protesters in Virginia topple statue of Confederate President Jefferson Davis along Richmond's famed Monument Avenue. And that kind of goes to my point. Like, you need to move way beyond your racist past. Otherwise, you're condemned to continue repeating it. And I think any kind of scoffing...
And for some, I can't speak for those over, I want to say 60 who kind of hold this ideology. Again, I'm casting a wide net here. I know it varies in age ranges of these, hateful ideologies, but I think that's a very, very, very tall order for some people. And I don't see how that could be. I don't see how it's so hard to just accept someone as your equal. Is it a sign of the times that is just changing in the 21st century? Yeah, definitely. But the fact that people just can't let go of their ideologies, their past ideologies, because they want to, their livelihood is them being right. That one race is inordinately better than another race. And I don't understand how that could be as just a snap judgment.
Well, there's another aspect to it that I've encountered, which is, and it's interesting because these are it's the people that, people like myself that call ourselves anti-racists. We reach out to people of older generations thinking, look, you lived through the 60s. You saw all this stuff. You were there listening to the Beatles, Rubber Soul, watching Martin Luther King. You were there watching JFK talk about we need to put a man on the moon and go to Cuba. Like you bask in that time period. And now you're basically in the sequel of that. And this is where there's a twist, and it's not the conservative racist twist that has always been there, since the beginning of time. It's this kind of limpy reactionaryism. And what I mean by that is, it's people that got the most blunt education on what equality means. And these are the people that, even though they're not Republican, they're not conservative, they're not neo-Nazis, they'll still look at you square in the eye and say, no, all lives matter. And you're just shaking your head because you realize you're dealing with somebody who their only concept of racism literally is only from the 1960s. Yeah. And it's like the last 60 years haven't happened.
And really, as much as you take that statement, all lives matter, in a general sense, where, yes, given, we're talking about Black lives, though. This is the group that needs our help. Okay, so yes, all lives do matter, but right now that's not the focus. We could talk about this for hours and hours. And
of course, yeah.
Speaking as two white men, I'm sure that doesn't really help our argument enough. But
I think
us standing in solidarity with
we're
all
allies.
That's going on. Yeah,
I mean, I went to the protests because this stuff pisses me off. I've been. Even when I was in, what was it? Oh goodness. I think I was in high school. Like, I was literally one of the few people who had a problem with racism. And it seemed like everyone around me didn't. And it just baffled me because I'm like, wait a minute, people. Yeah. There's serious issues going on in the world. And you're more preoccupied with, God knows what, Stephen Sondheim, Pokemon, whatever. Like, you're more focused on stuff, whereas these are issues right now that we could be tackling. And, and granted, I also, there I go saying granted again, I unfortunately grew up in a more conservative area, which explains a lot about how much yelling and arguing I've had to do over the course of my life. But on top of that, being an anti-racist, I've got this crazy old neighbor who's like, oh, I can see you're sensitive about that, about racism. And I'm ready to yell at him. Actually, I think I did yell at him. I think I yelled at him. It's not just me. This is something we should all be angry at. if you consider yourself an anti-racist, it's not like you hear someone say something offensive and you just kind of look over across and watch it happen, and you kind of do your Carl Pilkington and kind of look and go, all right. Like, you don't do that. You're going to basically tell the person to piss off. You're mad at them. They're dehumanizing a fellow human being, and the one thing that racist needs is a history lesson. And so, before we get on to the next topic, it's that's just it. It's like, I want, had coronavirus not been a thing, spoilers for our next topic, coronavirus. Had coronavirus not been a thing, I would have we all probably would have seen these protests go on into November, I think. And I sincerely
definitely
wish.
think so. I definitely think so. And I know that we've had, certain conversations where I think just kind of seeing the realism in it, where we had the opinion of that, despite, and this was a few months ago, but I remember us saying verbatim, despite everything that's happening, I will not be surprised if Trump gets reelected. Yeah. However, I don't think most Republicans agree with how he handled not just coronavirus and the public outcry of it, but the protests as well. Personally, I don't think he has a shot at reelection. I know any Democrat you ask is going to, affirm that, but
I wouldn't be too sure.
Again, Biden is up 10 points in Colorado, and that's huge, especially in Colorado Springs, which is a pretty big slap in the face politically. But it just came as a surprise to me when Heather told me.
It's the pro-weed state in favor of the anti-weed candidate. It doesn't make sense.
I mean, yeah.
But, well, let me ask you this, because you said you mentioned Republicans' reaction to Trump. Now, when you say Republicans, are you talking about Republican lawmakers or just
Republicans in Congress?
Okay,
I do think that they are going to be crossing the aisle or jumping the aisle, or however the fuck you said it. I was a poli-sci major, if you couldn't tell, but I dropped that long ago. Crossing the aisle this election simply out of a lack of etiquette, you could say.
Like switching parties?
Not switching parties, but more so just, kind of weighing in their options carefully. Do I really want to support someone who didn't handle coronavirus, in relation to business, but also in relation to, their constituents, Republican voters? Right. So, if we can't appease the voters, if we can't appease the small business owners, then we don't have a platform to stand on.
Right. Because it just kind of seems to me like, because you're right, I did say, following Bernie doing the right thing and dropping out, I did say, Trump's got 4 years, 4 more years. But that I will amend that statement now and say it's up in the air. It's anybody's game. And, and I only say that because this is the thing that I think especially a lot of people on the East Coast and a lot of the old media heads, that they still look at Trump like he's any other president, where he says something outrageous, everybody gets mad and says, it's unpresidential. And then a week later, he does the same thing, and they act in the exact same way, like as if it's never happened before. And I genuinely feel like there's enough people out there that aren't reactionary like that, and they just don't care. They just want to see the guy. It's the power dynamic that, politicians want to just stay in power for the power. And in this case, he doesn't like the job. He can't have his rallies, although allegedly he's going to start up his rallies again this month because everybody's reopening. And, it just seems like it just seems so up in the air. And I guess since I mentioned that, we might as well get to the second beautiful part of our discussion. Speaking of reopening.
Right. So there's a very big dichotomy of where I am versus where you are. As I stated before, Colorado basically was just slammed on the gas pedal, no fucks given, and is opening everything back up, which is great that they're over the second hurdle, or the second, I don't know, what do the news call it? Second wave?
Well,
COVID.
Well, that's...
And granted, yes, Colorado in comparison to California is immensely smaller. Okay, and you go to somewhere like Colorado Springs, which is the fucking Santa Clarita Tatooine desert of
oh my god,
Colorado. A population here that doesn't even surpass 1,000, I'm guessing, give or take. You barely see any people here. But no, you drive down to Sonic, to Target, to fucking any dispensary. Well, there's no dispensaries in Colorado Springs. You have to go to Manitou for that, as I said.
They're essential businesses.
But no, yeah, they're essential businesses. Great. But, nobody's wearing masks. Which, again, you can either take it as great, this thing's finally starting to settle, or wow, people are just very, very ignorant and not being safe for themselves. Now, if it's the former... great, and I don't have to worry like I did when I first made the drive out here.
Mm-hmm.
That only makes me wonder what the hell's going to happen when I get back to California when, we aren't over this wave, okay? And as much as a lot of people would want to say, well, you're entering into territory that has much more rampant protests and people not abiding by social distancing laws and yada yada, and the little itch in the back of your mind says, well, if they would have just behaved like Colorado, none of this would have happened. It's going to be really hard to go back because personally I think it's beautiful here. Wow, that was a long diatribe.
It's 100 degrees where I am, by the way. It's been 100 degrees today and I'm still sweating. Like, I got air conditioning, I got a fan on. You're not missing anything, trust me.
Well,
like, the only thing you're going to miss is everything reopening on Friday, which is kind of the meat of our story.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, you want to talk about missing something. Miss me with that hike I took the other day where it was sunny, rained for 15 minutes, wind, thunder, and hail in that order. And keep in mind, we're up in the mountains taking this hike, okay? So if a stray bolt of lightning hits a tree, we're screwed. But yeah, no, beautiful state. So anyway.
There was a fire right by where I live at the start of the week. It was wonderful. I woke up to a smoky bedroom.
Yeah, but in other news, gyms, museums, hotels, day camps, arena sports can reopen in LA County on Friday by the Los Angeles Times. Thank God. Maybe I can go back to my job as a camp counselor, because Los Angeles County on Wednesday announced that gyms and fitness facilities, pro league arenas without audiences, which doesn't make any lick of sense, because if you're watching anything pro league, you want to watch it as an audience member, okay?
Right.
Day camps, museums, galleries, zoos, aquariums, campgrounds, RV parks, and outdoor recreational areas, including swimming pools, music, film, and television production, and hotels for leisure travel will be allowed to reopen Friday. That means more shitty Star Wars movies. Yay.
Wait. What?
I know.
Oh.
I just said that. I just said that to get your goat.
Well.
Yeah. So now all the fitness gurus can go back to making their Instagram inspirational videos, which, my God, if there was ever a thing to be without living for, that's it.
Well, they found a way.
They found a way.
Quote Dr. Ian Malcolm, life found the way. This all bothers me.
I mean, great that, we're finally, I guess, starting to get over the hump, and these these, I guess, non-essential businesses are deciding that they're going to be opening their doors. What does that mean for active cases? I'm predicting another increase.
Yes, that is why I am very subtly doing the Jaws theme, and hopefully we will not be flagged by that. But it's like, and on top of that, and I don't recall if it was mentioned in the story. I think it was later in the day, and it was a separate article that mentioned it. But also, Disneyland and Disneyland Resorts are planning to reopen July 17th, which, of course, I immediately had to tell everybody within my circle, that's a shame because that's 13 days too late to open.
Yeah.
You want Disneyland open on the 4th of July. Come on.
No, you don't. And you don't want to go to Disneyland on the 4th of July. Everyone knows that it's this magical, this magical fucking place on the 4th of July, or any holiday for that matter. The thing is, once you see the crowds, you never end up going to Disneyland on a holiday. you get on the 405. Is it the 405 to Anaheim?
Man, it's been so long since I've been to Disneyland.
I'm drawing a blank.
I forgot how to get there.
you get on the freeway to Disneyland, and you see traffic backed up until, because you got to go through Glendale. Yeah, you see the traffic backed up to Glendale, and you're like, fuck this. Take DeSoto Avenue off.
Oh, I remember going to Disneyland, and we were stuck next to the Gene Autry Museum of the American West, which is a beautiful place, and it's cool to look at, especially if you're stuck in traffic. But the whole point is to get to Disneyland, not to hang out at the Gene Autry Museum. So, which, granted, as of right now, I'd prefer the Autry Museum over Disneyland. But it's just, because you mentioned as well the second, not the second wave, but the I guess you'd call it the second curve.
Yeah, that's what they're calling it.
Because historically, during epidemics or pandemics, case in point, the 1918 influenza pandemic, I'll put it in modern terms for a second. Remember when everything started and the first thing health officials said was, we need to flatten the curve. And they basically showed us exactly what we were in for with a pandemic. And they just showed this kind of upside down U shape, and how we want this upside down U shape to start plateauing and keep plateauing after it's dropped significantly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's great, but I have still not seen anything that's going to give me any confidence into thinking that A, we flatten the curve, and B, and this is where I get into my Spanish flu thing, the Spanish flu, it wasn't like an upside down U. It was more like an upside down W, which means there was one hump, and then there was a drop in cases and a drop in deaths, and then it rose significantly again. And then it dropped, and then it rose significantly again. And it basically kept doing this over several months.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, back then, germ theory was very problematic for a lot of people. World War I was raging in Europe. That was a part of the reason why the Spanish flu was so deadly, was because of a bloody world war going on at the time. But, it goes back to what I was saying about sort of the ignorant isolationist, if you will, the person who, they never took coronavirus seriously enough. They went out not wearing a mask. They didn't social distance with people. And then they see the people protesting and they think, oh, I guess I can go back out again. Everything's back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part of me that also feels like there's a lot of politicians out there that I think feel the same way, where they basically see all these people protesting, and rather than take it on face value as these are people protesting because they're tired of seeing unarmed black men and women being lynched in the streets of the United States of America. Instead of looking at it on that face value, they're looking at it as, well, we weren't going to be able to hold all these people into their homes to flatten the curve, so we might as well just reopen everything and see how we do. Because we got to get this economy going again. Plus, there's an election coming up, you see.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's the cold-heartedness of it, where, and again, this and I know I sound like a broken record about it, but I know I've hit a point where I'm hearing people use this term at the end of their sentences about, we got to have the beaches open on the 4th of July. It goes back to the Jaws thing, because this is exactly what, this is basically the long form version of Larry Vaughn from Jaws, where they're ignoring the problems, they're ignoring all this extra minutia, and they're more worried about their bloody pocketbooks. They're looking at their stocks, they're looking at, their polling numbers, and they're basically treating it as a power tool, and not a power tool like a drill, but like, how am I gonna one up myself? How am I gonna get a couple extra approval rating percentage points? Oh, I'll just reopen everything. But, and I'm still maintaining this, and I think you kind of hit on it in regards to Colorado. I think we're gonna wind up right back at where we were at in March. I seriously do.
No, I do too.
Not to be Johnny Raincloud over here, but
well, I mean, dude, we've been Johnny Raincloud since January or since March. Okay.
Remember when American Dirt was our biggest problem?
God, how we've grown, or should I say, how we've regressed?
I mentioned that with our good buddies Kenny and Pete, and you should. By the way, everybody should check them out. They're still working out of the Good News radio station, Touchdowns and Tangents. But I made a quick appearance on Touchdowns and Tangents last week. They kind of did a similar format like what we did, except they had people call in. It was just Kenny, and then Pete called in towards the end of the show. But anyway, I had reached out to him at one point, and I mentioned Oprah was going to have a town hall with other African American, celebrities, authors, directors.
She actually did. It was a 2-hour special on, a ridiculous amount of channels. I actually caught the beginning of an end portion of it over here in Colorado.
But it's kind of like, that was I made the point of, are we going to watch her, or are we going to help support the one person who criticized her for basically supporting a very offensive and arguably racist book like American Dirt? And then that was basically my way of introducing Miriam Gerba to Kenny and Pete, and basically saying, yeah, she's a badass, and she called Oprah out, and like, mentioning that, I just remember thinking exactly what I told you just now, which is, man, American Dirt, that feels like a decade ago.
Yeah.
Like, but because on top of things opening up, film production can resume. Obviously, there's movie studios that can't wait to get everything back rolling again. Movie theaters would have to reopen and have probably limited seating, which, is tough, because that's just it. This is going to be the weirdest summer season ever. It's encouraging, and it's good to hear people talk about, movies and stuff, but there's a lot of critics out there and film reviewers, and a lot of them are also YouTubers that are like, no. I'm fine. I'm not gonna go to the theater. There's nothing that's gonna get me to go out and see, the next Marvel film or the next espionage thriller, because, coronavirus is still a huge deal. And, to say to say that, we're in phase 3, we're, everything. And of course you have Trump who, thinks everything changes with the flick of a switch. He thinks he's going to fix the economy lickety split before the end of summer. But I genuinely believe that the reopenings and to some extent the protests are going to put us in a pretty hairy predicament in the coming weeks. Which is a shame, obviously, because, we're, this isn't how we imagined our show being, but we adjusted, we adapted, and we're going to survive. I'm not going to break into the Bill Pullman Independence Day speech because I don't know it. But it's just frustrating because this was kind of like, we knew this was in the cards, we ignored it, and we're going to suffer the consequences for it. In the name of protesting, you know what? There's things that Americans need to be angry about, and a lot of us have pent-up anger and frustration, and we have to let it out into something positive, and that's what these protests have been. On the flip side, if it's people that are just that damn desperate for a flippin' haircut,
Seriously, what is the issue with that? Okay, so I got my haircut yesterday, and, my girlfriend, bless her heart, she did a pretty good job at it. I think the fear in most Americans is that, it just won't look good. And to the boomers out there, I say, what fucking hair? But to the protesters under 30, or should I say the anti-protesters who, are not petitioning for anything globally worthwhile other than what's on their head, what is the shame in just dealing with it, in just doing it yourself or having somebody else do it? Who's going to see you?
Or just grow it out.
Just grow it out. There's hairstyles that could be implemented for males. Hard to believe it's going to be long hair. Yeah. But I think I've seen more overgrown beards and bald heads, which look pretty decent, than, no beards and just long hair, like the Jesus cut, basically.
Right.
So, but then again, that's a matter of choice. And, if you want your hair to look good or look as good as your previous barber cut it before the pandemic was a thing, well, tough shit. It's going to grow back anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's just it. You're, for some of these people, you're kind of thinking to yourself, why do you need to be so on fleek when it's just you in your bedroom? Who are you going to woo, and who are you going to, become sexually attracted to when it's just you living at home? The clubs are closed, my friend. The beaches are open, but the idea was the beaches would reopen for people that wanted to work out. Now, literally every single time one of the local news channels covers people going to the beach, nobody's working out. They're always showing people sunbathing, and they're violating those rules. However, the police have been spread thin, and as we've seen with the protests, and which, frankly, I consider that a good thing, because it means one magic phrase, to quote the late great John Lennon, power to the people. But this angst over hair, for goodness sake, people, no one was complaining about long hair back in the 18th century. In fact, that was the style. And on top of that, no one in the 1960s and 70s or even the 80s were complaining about how much hair they had, because it was in style. Now, this is kind of a self-imposed style, but live with it. I mean, for goodness sake, what was it? 2006 to, what was it? 2008, 2009? Everybody had long hair. I had longer hair back then. And it was the trend. I mean, for crying out loud, Hayden Christensen, Rupert Grint, Daniel Radcliffe, they all had long hair for like no obvious reason other than it was in. And granted, Anakin was supposed to have longer hair because they wanted to show off the fact that he was a Jedi Knight in Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, but I digress. Like, it was all about the style of that time period. And obviously that applies with the 60s and 70s. But, you know, the idea that it's problematic now, I mean, we're all living through a period that's unprecedented. To quote literally everyone since March 13th. And this idea that, you know, we have to maintain how we appear like we're Christian Bale's character from American Psycho. I mean, yes, you know, keep yourself fit, keep yourself healthy, keep yourself active, but, you know, it's your health that matters. You know, unless you have a condition where you literally cannot grow your hair and it must be shaven or it must be cut off, fine, okay. But the idea that it's something to be so angsty about to go out and get a haircut, I mean, it's people that just don't understand the situation, I think. And it's sad because...
Oh, yeah, because they want to think that the world revolves around them and their asinine needs, where, you know, making mountains out of molehills such as this is ridiculous. You know, when my hair got too long, I bit the bullet and I was like, you know what, fuck it. Like, can you cut my hair, please?
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Surprisingly, it didn't turn out that bad. And it didn't turn out that bad the second time because, you know, hair grows back.
Yeah.
And, you know, you just kind of keep going through that and you kind of start to get over the fact that it's just hair, you know. I'm surprised that we're even going on a tangent for this long about this, but, you know, I think it really is a testament to how small-minded and overtly sociopathic some people are, where they think that this is going to define my personality. I get it.
Yeah.
A lot of Americans cooped up inside have nothing to do. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Every single minuscule thing is cataclysmic to them. Okay? Good or for worse, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, having something as a haircut or, you know, a new Netflix show or a disagreement online or, you know, any kind of opinion that doesn't go with the norm, but they want to speak it anyway because they think that it establishes their superiority to fucking ones and zeros on the internet, no less. You know, it just kind of goes to show that, you know, we can go into this next episode, but what has quarantine done for people or done to people?
Right. It's,
you know,
well, it's also, it's placing vanity over public health, which, you know, I guess if there was ever anything for me to really like turn into a focal point for how much I get frustrated at the times we live in, it's the fact that that even exists. People's vanity over public health. I mean, in a warped way, it's almost reminiscent of, you know, stories you hear of the 1980s. And, you know, hell, I haven't even gotten to Andy Schultz's book about the AIDS crisis. I was going to read that this month, but, you know, the times changed and I ended up going with the radical history of Los Angeles in the 60s. But it just, this idea of people and their attention span and their tenacity to think, well, I can't have anything change my regimen. And you're thinking, well, how about the rest of us who either can't risk our lives, or we can't risk to get a haircut, or we can't risk to go to a restaurant and eat in the restaurant, which, by the way, you're now allowed to do in some places in Los Angeles County. But also, you're just so flummoxed at somebody basically stopping in your path. Well, what about those of us that lost jobs? I mean, I had a job. I was going to go back to it, and now I can't because of a quarantine and because of coronavirus. I can't find a substitute for that. All I can do is keep myself healthy and keep myself safe, but I know that means I can't see you. I can't see any of my other close friends. I can't see, former coworkers of mine. I can't do anything. I mean, I can drive, and yes, I did go to the protests, but even when I was at the protests, I was the one dude social distancing. I was the one person who stayed like 20 feet away. That's a lie. 10 feet away from people because I'm still not clueless to the fact that there's a bloody plague going on. And, my status quo has changed, and I'm okay with that because if it means keeping myself healthy and keeping myself safe, as well as the people I love, keeping them healthy and safe, I'll do it. Hell, I made the crack to my folks that growing my hair out, it's like watching a slow regeneration from Doctor Who. Like, I feel like I'm changing from one Ryan into a different Ryan. It's insane. I guess it's just the materialism of it all, where it's people that they just hated the fact that they can't go shopping or they can't color their hair because they don't want people to see the white in their hair, or the people like my grandmother who have literally had the same hairstyle since the early 1970s, and she's actually growing her hair out for the first time and she doesn't like it. Well,
vanity will be the death of this fucking country. Put it in stone, put it on my epitaph. Like, I'll say it to the day I die, And again, we can go on and on about this, but
yeah,
I think it's a good place to end our exhaustion. Why don't you tell the good people where we can find you?
Alrighty. Well, by order of the Peaky Blinders, you will find me on Instagram at Mancini Ryan. I've been sharing everything that I've seen at the protests, as well as sharing information about future protests. As for Twitter, I'm having just as many problems with Twitter as you've been having, where I'm on the verge of deleting it. However, I cannot, just because of both news, but also this show. It needs Twitter. So you can find me at ManciniRA on Twitter. As to you, Sebastian, where can the good people find you?
Oh, okay. Going down the laundry list here. Well, first and foremost, if you want to find me on the desolate wasteland that is Twitter, you could find me at Dr. Sebi. That's at Dr_SEBBY. Same as Instagram, at DRSEBBY as well. Funny thing, I actually went on it today, Twitter, just to see what was up. Not that much. Once I, trespassed into a comment section outlining the pros and cons of OnlyFans, I pretty much just alt-right exited. And that was fun. But you could also find me on many other sites as well. First off, YouTube. You find me under the moniker Seabass, like the fish. Yes, I post daily narrations up there. Haven't for a few days now because, again, I'm in Colorado and there's company. So I haven't really been finding any opportune times to record. But rest assured, after the 13th, that will resume. You can also find me pretty much just audio only at Anchor as well, under Shugsy's Storytime. Yes, that is the name. Oh God, you can also find me at Sebastian Shug Publishing as well. Feel free to send me a manuscript. Been publishing a lot of books lately, such as recently, again, Read Their Names, which is a collective literary database of every single victim of police brutality, systemic racial oppression, etc. And essentially, that's pretty much it. Oh yeah, I'll speak this into existence now. I was talking about this earlier, and it just kind of came up. Oh no, it's nothing bad. I hate to sound like every single 17-year-old in high school when I say this, but I've been kind of getting the music bug to make music.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really decided on anything yet. I do know that I want to have some sort of elements of lo-fi in there. Just something chill, bro. But I've been toying around with it, and I think honestly, I'm thankful that this quarantine has led me to be a lot more experimental. So, yeah, it's been a fun ride. We are very, very close to. I'm not sure if it's this episode, and you can edit this out if you want, but audio visualization for our episode.
Yes, we'll be close to that. I'll make sure to get that information your way so that you can do your magic, and we'll have a whole new platform for people.
I'm stoked. So
yeah, no, it'll be great. And I guess one other quick shout out. I mentioned it in our first topic, but if you have the chance, definitely pick up "Set the Night on Fire" by Mike Davis and John Wiener. It's the tapestry of history in this book, and especially local relevant history, is staggering. It's, at times it's a bit of a tearjerker, but a lot of times it just shows how much of a struggle everything is, and it's absolutely well worth the read. It's a big ass book. And I know that was something that was brought up to them during a live stream when the book was published. But nonetheless, it's something you could actually get through quickly. I started it on, June 1st, and I'm more than halfway through now. Obviously, there's a quarantine, so I have plenty of time to read. But again, definitely pick it up. For any kind of social context and commentary as to what is going on now versus back then, pick it up. And with that, I think we're good to go for this one.
Take care, everyone.
You've been listening to Mars on Life. Please make sure that you find us over on social media at Mars on Life Show on both Twitter and on Instagram. And on top of that, you can find this show on Anchor, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Our artwork is done by Zachary Erberich, and our intro music is Space Explorers by Kevin MacLeod. I've been Ryan Mancini. My co-host, as always, is Sebastian Shug. And just remember, if you keep on going, you'll make it to Mars.